folks. All right, welcome to the Great American Mail live stream of today's January 6th committee hearings. They have not started, as you can see on the screen there. They have not gone forward. The Great American Mail, the Florida and Georgia lawyer that breaks down
University and former
the news and events of the day through the lens of the law, the Constitution, and history. Let me just let our Twitter fans know out there that we are going live so they can join if they want. I have up here several feeds, one of which should be bringing in the January 6th folks. This is the 9th hearing. Today we are supposed to not hear from any live witnesses. Again, these folks have not been very well scripted, and they have not really gone well to script in the past. So we will see what happens. Let's go back while we got a few moments here. And see if we can find out there what they've been trying to do and what they're trying to do going forward, and then we'll join them in progress when they show up. All right, so let's see if I can do this right here. So I've got to go get the wrong thing up. There we go. Let's see if I can pull up Microsoft Word. See if it'll come up. It does. Okay, so. All right, folks, the prior hearings, scroll all the way to the top here. There's a bunch of things they've been trying to accomplish with the hearing, one of which is, as you see here, and I'm just going to highlight it so you can see it. It's this list here. Let me see if I can make it a little bigger. It's not working for some reason. I don't know why it would not work. It should. Let's see. There you go. A little bit bigger. All right. Okay, so first they're trying to show that Trump caused the violence. And I don't think they've effectively done any of the things that they think they're trying to do out there at all. They may think they have.
Donald Trump lost
here
his
we go.
bid
All right,
for
we got to go
re-election,
back. Hold on a second.
as shown from the test.
Let me pull it back up. I didn't realize they do this on me. They come up faster than I can catch them. And let's see. Let's go to Safari, and we'll catch Benny Thompson. There he is.
Of some of the president's closest allies and advisors, Donald Trump knew he lost. Despite this knowledge, Donald Trump went to court to contest the 2020 election.
This is very typical of what they do. I mean, they mind read. No one knows what's in his mind. I don't know how Benny Thompson knows that he lost, but anyway, they've been doing this all along.
And he lost in court. The Electoral College met and declared Joe Biden the winner. Yet Donald Trump continued to pull out all the stops in his attempt to stay in power. What Donald Trump proceeded to do after the 2020 election is something no president has done before in our country. In a staggering betrayal of his oath, Donald Trump attempted a plan that led to an attack on a pillar of our democracy. It's still hard to believe. But the facts and testimony are clear, consistent, and undisputed. How do we know this?
Undisputed. Because you won't bring any opposition.
How have we been able to present such a clear picture of what took place? Because of the testimony we've heard and that we have presented to you through these proceedings. Because of the documentary evidence
Because of the testimony we've heard
and also made available directly to you, the American people. When you look back at what has come out through this committee's work, the most striking fact is that all this evidence comes almost entirely from Republicans. The evidence that has emerged did not come from Democrats or opponents of Donald Trump. Instead,
now that's just a flat-out lie. Just because you're a Republican doesn't mean you're allied with Trump. I mean, this is why this committee has been ineffective. Is they overreach, they get out over their skis every single solitary time almost. That was an unnecessary. You had a point, and then you just had to keep going. This guy just has no legal training, no hearing training at all. He shouldn't be leading this committee.
Look at who's written and testified and produced evidence. Who has that been? Aides who've worked loyally for Donald Trump for years.
Also
Republican
a lie.
state officials and legislators, Republican electors, the chairwoman of the Republican National Committee, political professionals who worked at the highest levels of the Trump campaign, Trump appointees who served in the most senior positions in the Justice Department, President Trump's staff and closest advisors in the White House, members of the President Trump's family, his own White House counsel. I've served in Congress a long time. I can tell you it's tough for any congressional investigation to obtain evidence like what we've received, least of all such a detailed view into a president's inner circle. And I want to be clear.
This is another thing they do a lot of, and they did in all. This is the 9th hearing. And again, this is the worst they've been, which is sad that you're not getting better the more you go on. But, I'm going to tell you something, and I'm going to tell you, in my opinion, this is a rare thing. We don't care what your opinion is, Benny. Get to somebody else and have some. And again, you get to pick the people without any minority representation. So you can bring somebody in and say, hey, I got to be honest. I've been doing this for 40 years. I've never seen it. But he does it himself. It's just incompetence of the first order.
Not all these witnesses were thrilled to talk to us. Some put up quite a fight. But ultimately, the vast majority cooperated with our investigation. And what we've shown you over the last 4 months has been centered on the evidence. Evidence that has come overwhelmingly from Republican witnesses. So I say to you again, as I did in June, this investigation is not about politics. It's not about party. It's about the facts, plain and simple. And it's about
That's why you won't allow any minority
government
representation on the committee.
Under the rule of law, as our Constitution demands. Today, as in previous proceedings, my colleagues and I will present new evidence. That includes new testimony from additional Republicans who served in the Trump administration, never before seen footage of congressional leaders on January 6th working to coordinate the response to the violence and ensure the people's business went forward. New materials produced to the committee by the Secret Service, details about the ongoing threat to American democracy.
Folks, it's not going to be anything new. It's not. It's just going to be a rehash, as they've always done throughout this. This is the 9th one. They did it in the other 8. It's going to be a rehash of stuff we already knew, and I'll prove it when they get to it. But now it's just from a different person or from a different viewpoint. But it's the same car wreck that's always been out there. This committee is a joke. This is not a good start. They've been gone for 3 months. They had 3 months to do this, and they come out with this. It's really sad.
Will also be grounded in the facts. But it won't look exactly like all our other hearings. We'll also take a step back and look at the evidence in a broader context, providing a summary of key facts we've uncovered. Facts relevant to former President Trump's state of mind, about his motivation, and about his intent. What did President Trump know? What was he told? What was his personal and substantial role in the multi-part plan to overturn the election? For those of you who watched our prior hearings, some of this evidence will look familiar. For those of you tuning in for the first time, we'll summarize some of the most important facts, and we'll urge you to go online.
Folks, they did some of these in prime time, 8 o'clock, and I'm grateful for Benny for not doing it today, because it kills me when I have to cover these things. I've covered all of them in live stream. And again, that tells you that they're doing it at 1 o'clock on a Thursday. It tells you they got nothing. Only the most rabid partisan is tuning in to this thing. More incompetence, just more failure on their part.
Watch our hearing in full. There's one more difference about today. Pursuant to the notice circulated prior to today's proceedings, we are convened today not as a hearing, but as a formal committee business meeting, so that in addition to presenting evidence, we can potentially hold a committee vote on further investigative action based upon that evidence. Before we get to that
What a gimmick. What a gimmick. Oh, I wonder how it's going to come out, seeing as how you have zero representation from the minority party. I wonder how they're going to vote, folks. We'll stick around for that. That's going
I
to be
recognize our distinguished vice chair,
Oh, here
Ms.
comes
Cheney
Cheney.
of Wyoming, for any opening statement she'd care to offer.
Please, God, Cheney, don't
Thank
go
you very
long.
much, Mr. Chairman. Much has happened since our last public hearing on July 21st.
No, it hasn't.
As the chairman mentioned, we've received new and voluminous documentation from the Secret Service, which we continue to analyze. We've received new witness testimony, including about efforts to obstruct our investigation and conceal key facts. And according to public reporting, the Department of Justice has been very active in pursuing many of the issues identified in our prior...
According to public reporting, as if it's not the same. We all know that the deep state leaks stuff, and we know about this cabal list. I mean, come on, really, come up with something there.
hearings. Our committee may ultimately decide to make a series of criminal referrals to the Department of Justice.
Anybody
But we
think they don't know how
recognize
they're
that
going to
our
vote?
role is not to make decisions regarding prosecution. The preamble to our Constitution recites among its purposes to, quote, establish justice. And our nation's judiciary and our U.S. Department of Justice have that responsibility. A key element of this committee's responsibility is to propose reforms to prevent January 6th from ever happening again. We've already proposed, and the House has now passed, a bill to amend the Electoral Count Act to help ensure that no other future plots to overturn an election can succeed. And we will make further specific recommendations in our final report, based in part on the evidence you will hear today. Our hearings last summer began with an outline of President Trump's multi-part plan to overturn the 2020 presidential
I think she
election.
means this past summer.
We then proceeded to demonstrate each of these elements in detail.
They haven't.
With more than 20 hours of evidence.
No, it wasn't.
Today, we will see new evidence, but as the chairman said, we will also synthesize evidence you've seen before. The vast weight of evidence presented so far has shown us that the central cause of January 6th was one man, Donald Trump, whom many others followed. None of this would have happened without him. He was personally and substantially involved in all of it.
Now, to be fair, folks, I think this is about the only thing they've shown. It doesn't mean anything, really. It doesn't get you anywhere. But when I was pulling up the list of things, there's about 6 or 7 they're trying to do. And this one, I think they have effectively shown that Donald Trump was the driving force between challenging Biden's certification. Just to be fair, I want to be honest about it. I don't think it means anything, and they haven't tied it to any crime, but he was the driving factor.
Exactly how did one man cause all of this? Today, we will focus on President Trump's state of mind, his intent, his motivations, and how he spurred others to do his bidding, and how another January 6th could happen again if we do not take necessary action to prevent it. As you view our evidence today...
I don't know how you prevent rallies that get out of control. I mean, that's the best thing they got about January 6th. They haven't demonstrated anything else. I'm not really sure how unless you prevent people from having rallies, which you can't because of the so-called First Amendment that she apparently doesn't respect.
I would suggest a focus on the following points. First, as you will see, President Trump had a premeditated plan to declare that the election was fraudulent and stolen before Election Day, before he knew the election results. He made his stolen election claims on election night against the advice of his campaign without any evidence in hand. Then, over the next 2 months, he sought to find those who would help him invent and spread lies about the widespread fraud. Many of those who stepped forward to help, including Rudy Giuliani, knew they never had real evidence sufficient to change the election results. And on the evening of January 5th, they admitted they were still trying to find that phantom evidence. Of course, as a result of making intentionally false claims of election fraud, Mr. Giuliani's license to practice law has now been suspended. Second, please recognize that President Donald Trump was in a unique position, better informed about the absence of widespread election fraud than almost any other American. President Trump's own campaign experts told him that there was no evidence to support his claims. His own Justice Department appointees investigated the election fraud claims and told him point blank they were false. In mid-December 2020, President Trump's senior advisors told him the time had come to concede the election. Donald Trump knew the courts had ruled against him. He had all of this information, but still he made the conscious choice to claim fraudulently that the election was stolen, to pressure state officials to change election results, to manufacture fake electoral slates, to attempt to corrupt our Department of Justice, to summon tens of thousands of supporters to Washington. Knowing that they were angry, knowing that some of them were armed, he sent them to the Capitol. Then as the riot...
Same thing with Benny. Again, folks, they have not found one single solitary weapon, unless you consider a Viking helmet and zip ties a weapon. None. Now, the fact that they were armed, they were at the earlier part where he spoke, not when they went to the Capitol. And again, folks, you've got a hearing where there is no representation from the minority party. You are the only arbiter of what goes forward. There is no reason for you to overstate. This loses people. It loses juries. I'm a trial lawyer. I've tried many cases. Juries do not like this. I understand the rabid partisans, they're going to eat this up like candy. But you should literally be going, I got them, let me get a few others. And they could, but she just can't help herself. Lying like that, it just doesn't make any sense.
He incited his supporters to further violence by publicly condemning his vice president. And then he refused for hours to disband his rioting supporters and instruct them to leave the Capitol, even when he was begged repeatedly to do so. None of this is normal or acceptable or lawful in our republic. Third, please consider today who had a hand in defeating President Trump's efforts to overturn the election. Vice President Pence, Bill Barr, Jeff Rosen, and others at the Department of Justice, state Republican officials, White House staff who blocked proposals to mobilize the military to seize voting machines and run new elections.
Wow.
Our Capitol Police, aided by the Metropolitan Police, other federal law enforcement, and our National Guard, who arrived later in the afternoon. All of these people had a hand in stopping Donald Trump. This leads us to a key question. Why would Americans assume that our Constitution and our institutions in our republic are invulnerable to another attack? Why would we assume that those institutions will not falter next time?
Well, let's assume for the sake of the argument they had gotten Pence or whatever. How would that have stopped anything? They still haven't explained that. Anyway, it's even assuming that they can prove that he, had this whole plot.
The lesson of this investigation is this: our institutions only hold when men and women of good faith make them hold, regardless of the political cost. We have no guarantee that these men and women will be in place next time. Any future president inclined to attempt what Donald Trump did in 2020 has now learned not to install people who could stand in the way. And also, please consider this: the rulings of our courts are respected and obeyed because we as citizens pledge to accept and honor them. Most importantly, our president, who has a constitutional obligation to faithfully execute the laws, swears to accept them. What happens when the president disregards the court's rulings as illegitimate? When he disregards the rule of law?
How did he do that?
That, my fellow citizens, breaks our republic.
They still haven't shown that he's done that. Finally, as you view the
evidence today, also consider this. President Trump knew from unassailable sources that his election fraud claims were false.
That's not been proven.
He had lost the election.
That's not been proven either.
He took actions consistent with that belief. Claims that President Trump actually thought the election was stolen are not supported by fact and are not a defense. There is no defense that Donald Trump was duped or irrational. No president can defy the rule of law and act this way in a constitutional republic.
Now, this is sort of an interesting new claim for them, but I don't know where it gets them again, because you've got to show certain things, which, again, they're going to vote on, I'm not really sure whether they go through some criminal thing, which they don't even have criminal authority to do. This whole thing is really, to the extent it's a quote-unquote investigation, which they keep calling it that, it's improper under the Constitution. Article 1 branch, which is Congress, has no authority to do that. But I'm not really sure why they're going into Trump's mental state. It's really not really relevant to what they're trying to show.
Period. Mr. Chairman, our nation's federal judges are sworn to do impartial justice, to preserve our Constitution and preserve our Union.
I don't know where they're going with this.
Dozens of these judges have been addressing January 6th cases, and many have given us plain, unmistakable warnings about the direction of our republic. Let me read from one judge's statement given at a recent sentencing.
They've got a partisan judge that's going to say something and agrees with them.
High-ranking members of Congress and state officials who know perfectly well the claim of fraud was and is untrue, and that the election was legitimate, are so afraid of losing their power, they won't say so. It has to be crystal clear that it is not patriotism, it is not standing up for America, to stand up for one man who knows full well that he lost, instead of the Constitution he was trying to subvert.
So again, this is typical of what they've done. Amy Berman Jackson is an Obama appointee. She's a rabid partisan. Here's a statement from her. So what? So this is what she thinks. She believes it. Okay. She can read Trump's mind. I don't know where it gets them. And again, it's totally unnecessary. Plus, this committee will contradict itself often within a sentence, within a paragraph, within a page. You heard Benny Thompson. Oh, it's all Republicans. They're all Republicans. Let me pull up Amy Berman Jackson. She's not a Republican.
Mr. Chairman, the violence and lawlessness of January 6th was unjustifiable. But our nation cannot only punish the foot soldiers who stormed our Capitol. Those who planned to overturn our election and brought us to the point of violence must also be accountable. With every effort to excuse or justify the conduct of the former president, we chip away at the foundation of our republic. Indefensible conduct is defended. Inexcusable conduct is excused. Without accountability, it all becomes normal, and it will recur. So as we watch the evidence today, please consider where our nation is in its history. Consider whether we can survive for another 246 years. Most people in most places on earth have not been free. America is an exception. And America continues only because we bind ourselves to our founders' principles, to our Constitution. We recognize that some principles must be beyond politics, inviolate, and more important than any single American who has ever lived. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I yield back.
Again, a mistake to go that long.
Without objections,
anyway.
the chair recognizes the gentlewoman from California, Ms. Lofgren, for an opening statement.
Oh, boy. She's terrible,
Thank
too.
you, Mr. Chairman. Very shortly after the election, we begin this meeting by returning to election night, November 3rd, 2020. As the chairman noted, we've previously presented testimony about how the election results were expected to come in that night. In certain states, ballots cast by mail before Election Day would be counted only after the polls closed that evening. That meant that election results would not be known for some time. Although President Trump's campaign manager, Bill Stepien, House Republican leader Kevin McCarthy, and Jared Kushner had advised Donald Trump to encourage mail-in voting by Republicans, President Trump did not do so.
Yeah, I just remember generally, you had people arguing that we had a very, very robust get out the vote effort and that, mail-in ballots could be a good thing for us if we looked at it correctly.
There was one meeting that was had in particular. I invited Kevin McCarthy to join the meeting, he being of like mind on the issue with me. In which we made our case for why we believed mail-in voting, not to be a bad thing for his campaign. But the president's mind was...
This is another one of those things they do where I'm not really sure where they're going. Are they suggesting he could have gotten more votes had he not discouraged mail-in balloting? Or are they trying to show that he knew that a lot of votes would come in by mail, so he shouldn't just focus on election night? I'm not really sure, to be honest.
was made up.
So it was expected before the election that the initial counts in some states, in other words, those votes cast on election day, would be more heavily Republican. And this would create the false perception of a lead for President Trump, a so-called red mirage.
Again, this doesn't make any sense because you can start counting the votes on Election Day. So you would run through all of the mail-in ballots. I don't understand what this shows, but okay.
Of the absentee ballots that were later counted, there could be trends towards Vice President Biden as those mail-in ballots were counted.
You heard the words "could be." Okay, so what? I mean, what have you proven?
Now, on election night, Donald Trump's advisors specifically told him he didn't have a factual basis to declare victory. He should wait for the remaining ballots to be counted. Here is campaign manager Bill Stepien.
It was far too early to be making any calls like that. Ballots were still being counted. Ballots were still going to be counted for days. And it was far too early to be making any proclamation like that. I believe my recommendation was to say that votes were still being counted. It's too early to tell, too early to call the race.
But President Trump did declare victory in the late hours of election night. Not only did he declare victory, he also called for the ongoing count of votes to just stop. Stopping the count would have violated both federal and state laws and also disenfranchised millions of voters who lawfully cast their vote. He called for that action anyway. Here's what he said.
This is a fraud on the American public. This is an embarrassment to our country. We were getting ready to win this election. Frankly, we did win this election. We want all voting to stop.
We now know more about President Trump's intention for election night. The evidence shows that his false victory speech was planned well in advance, before any votes had been counted. It was a premeditated plan by the president to declare victory no matter what the actual result was. He made a plan to stay in office before Election Day. Now, the vice president's staff was concerned with what Donald Trump might do on election night. They took steps to ensure that Mr. Pence would not echo a false victory announcement from President Trump. Here's what the Vice President's counsel, Greg Jacob, told us about his preparations with the Vice President's Chief of Staff, Mark Short.
Mark had indicated to me that there was a possibility that there would be a declaration of victory within the White House that some might push for. And this is prior to the election results being known. And that he was trying to figure out a way of avoiding the vice president sort of being thrust into a position of needing to opine on that when he might not have sufficient information to do so.
Now, following this conversation, Mr. Jacob drafted a memo to Mr. Short, which the Select Committee got from the National Archives. The memo was sent on November 3rd, Election Day, and advised it is essential that the Vice President not be perceived by the public as having decided questions concerning disputed electoral votes prior to the full development of all relevant facts. A few days before the election, Mr. Trump also consulted with one of his outside advisors, inside activist Tom Fitton, about the strategy for election night. The Select Committee got this pre-prepared statement from the National Archives. As you can see, the draft statement, which was sent on October 31st, declares, "We had an election today, and I won." And the
Again, I don't know what this is going to show. I mean, he had challenged mail-in ballots the whole time. So again, they've got a strategy. I'm not really sure. And again, he's not the first person to say, you know, there's this problem and this problem and this problem with this way and the other way. I'm really sort of
memo
not really
specifically
sure
indicates a plan that only the votes counted by the Election Day deadline, and there is no Election Day deadline, would matter. Everyone knew that ballot counting would lawfully continue past Election Day. Claiming that the counting on Election night must stop before millions of votes were counted was, as we now know, a key part of President Trump's premeditated plan. On Election Day, just after 5 p.m., Mr. Fitton indicated he'd spoken with the president about the statement. Sending along again, just talked to him about the draft below. Again, this plan to declare victory was in place before any of the results had been determined. In the course of our investigation, we also interviewed Brad Parscale, President Trump's former campaign manager. He told us he understood that President Trump planned as early as July that he would say he won the election even if he lost. And just a few days before the election, Steve Bannon, a former Trump chief White House strategist and outside advisor to President Trump, spoke to a group of his associates from China and said this.
And what Trump's going to do is just declare victory, right? He's going to declare victory. But that doesn't mean he's the winner. He's just going to say he's the winner. The Democrats, more of our people vote early that count. Theirs voted mail. And so they're going to have a natural disadvantage, and Trump's going to take advantage of it. That's our strategy. He's going to declare himself a winner. So when you wake up Wednesday morning, it's going to be a firestorm. Also, if Trump is losing by 10 or 11 o'clock at night, it's going to be even crazier. No, because he's going to sit right there and say they stole it.
Agree.
I'm directing the Attorney General to shut down all ballot places in all 50 states. It's going to be no. He's not going out easy. If Biden's winning, Trump is going to do some crazy shit.
As you know, Mr. Bannon refused to testify in our investigation. He's been convicted of criminal contempt of Congress, and he's awaiting sentencing. But the evidence indicates that Mr. Bannon had advanced
something that's unprecedented, by the way. She just acts like it's no big deal. This committee is unprecedented. What happened to Bannon is unprecedented. And again, I don't know what any of this means. I mean, it's all like election strategy stuff. I'm not really sure what it's proving.
Knowledge of Mr. Trump's intent to declare victory falsely on election night, but also that Mr. Bannon knew about Mr. Trump's planning for January 6th. Here's what Bannon said on January 5th.
All hell is going to break loose tomorrow. It's all converging, and now we're on, as they say, the point of attack, right? The point of attack tomorrow. I'll tell you this. It's not going to happen like you think it's going to happen, okay? It's going to be quite extraordinarily different. And all I can say is strap in. You have made this happen, and tomorrow it's game day. So strap in. Let's get ready.
Okay, first and foremost, Bannon talks about everything that way. I mean, I have a feeling that if Bannon's going to go strap in, we're going to wash dishes. I mean, you're never going to see dishes washed like this before. It's just a joke. And again, I don't know what any of this means. I mean, people have declared victory before. I don't know. Sooner or later, they're going to get around to something.
Another close associate of Donald Trump apparently knew of Mr. Trump's intentions as well. Now, Roger Stone is a political operative with a reputation for dirty tricks. In November 2019, he was convicted of lying to Congress and other crimes and sentenced to more than 3 years in prison. He's also a longtime advisor.
Folks, this is the second time now. And again, this is their chief prosecutor for today, because they had Liz Cheney gave an opening, Benny Thompson gave an opening. Now you've got your lead prosecutor, who's Logan from California, and she both that complete hearsay from Bannon and now more hearsay from Roger Stone. I thought we were going to see evidence, but this isn't evidence. This is just propaganda. It's just nonsense, and it's clearly nonsense. I mean, where are the facts?
President Trump and was in communication with President Trump throughout 2020. Mr. Trump pardoned Roger Stone on December 23rd, 2020. Now, recently, the Select Committee got footage of Mr. Stone before and after the election from Danish filmmaker Christopher Gulbrandsen, pursuant to a subpoena. Right before the election, here's Roger Stone talking about what President Trump would do after the election.
Let's just hope we're celebrating. I really do suspect it'll still be up in the air. But when that happens, the key thing to do is to claim victory. Possession is 9/10 of the law. No, we won. Fuck you. Sorry, over. We won. Yeah. You're wrong. Fuck you.
ABC.
I said, fuck the law and let's get right to the violence. That's what I'm doing. Start smashing pumpkins if you know what I mean.
Again, it's hearsay. Now, look, to the extent he's talking, I heard him say, let's get right to the violence. If they can tie that, then, obviously you don't have the right. There's no First Amendment protected right for violence. I mean, that's obvious. We've got later, if I can get to it, we're going to go through some of the exceptions to First Amendment. Fighting words, obviously, violence might be there, and incitement to imminent lawless action, obviously. So if she can tie this, and I hope she can, the claim she's making, if she can tie that, let's see. Because that would be improper.
The Select Committee called Mr. Stone as a witness, but he invoked his Fifth Amendment right against self-incrimination.
Do you believe the violence on January 6th was justified?
On the advice of counsel, I respectfully decline to answer your question on the basis of the Fifth Amendment.
And Mr. Stone, did you have any role in planning?
So this is a trick that's done oftentimes. So you're not allowed to refer to this if this were truly a criminal proceeding. But since it's a quasi-criminal proceeding or civil proceeding, you're allowed to do this. Now, jurisdictions vary. Some jurisdictions will allow you to ask one question. The person says, I'm taking the Fifth, and then you can get one more question. Are you going to take the Fifth at all my questions? Yes. Other jurisdictions allow you to continue to ask questions. And so if you're somebody who's trying to mislead people, you will ask 100 questions knowing the answer to all 100 is going to be the Fifth. And that's what they're doing here. Repeatedly, the Fifth, the Fifth, the Fifth. Now, this would have been more powerful had the committee not been doing the things that it's been doing, which is acting, again, as though it's above the law, doing investigations when they only have legislative authority. Example, right? So to me, it doesn't say anything. They've demonstrated they're willing to go after people for criminal things that aren't crimes. Therefore, you're prudent to take the Fifth. So again, hearsay. So he took the Fifth. They haven't shown what crime and how it relates to Trump. This is just smear job. It really is. I wish they'd get to some real evidence.
Violence on January 6th?
Once again, I will assert my Fifth Amendment right to decline to answer your question.
Although we don't yet have all the relevant records of Roger Stone's communications, even Stone's own social media posts acknowledge that he spoke with Donald Trump on December 27th as preparations for January 6th were underway. In this post, you can see how Roger Stone talked about his conversations with President Trump. He wrote, I also told the president exactly how he can appoint a special counsel with full subpoena power to ensure those who are attempting to steal the 2020 election through voter fraud are charged and convicted, and to ensure Donald Trump continues as our president. As we know by now, the idea for a special counsel was not just an idle suggestion. It was something President Trump had actually tried to do earlier that month. We know that Roger Stone was at the Willard Hotel on January 5th and 6th, and we know from other witness testimony that President Trump asked his chief of staff, Mark Meadows, to speak with Roger Stone and General Michael Flynn that night. In addition to his connection to President Trump, Roger Stone maintained extensive direct connections to two groups responsible for violently attacking the Capitol,
Wow.
the Oath Keepers and the Proud Boys. Individuals from both of these organizations have been charged with the crime of seditious conspiracy.
So this is what people do who don't have anything. So again, now she's bringing in the Proud Boys and the Oath Keepers, which she says they've recently been charged with seditious conspiracy. The way this happened was January 6th, complete witch hunt on most of these people. Okay, and the ones that committed violence or something like that, they need to be prosecuted. That's obviously you can't do that. But then about a year later, people started saying on Twitter, myself included, that hey, you haven't challenged anybody with insurrection and seditious conspiracy. Immediately, Biden's DOJ started charging him. So you can charge people with whatever you want, but whatever. All right. Now, what that has to do with anything, we don't know. And they haven't shown it. All we know is that some of those people, for whatever reason, allegedly were there. That's all we know. And again, she's talking too much. She needs to let the witnesses talk. And again, this isn't evidence, folks. This is a presentation. Okay? She needs to shut up and get to the evidence.
A seditious conspiracy. It is a conspiracy to use violent force against the United States.
And again, they haven't tied. How would it? Let's assume, for the sake of the argument, you got hold of Pence. What would it have done for you? They can't tie it up. Not to mention, the Capitol, by their own admission, they've gone through it. I think it was the fourth hearing. It was about 4.5 hours that they delayed the count, and then they went forward.
Lawful authority of the United States. Multiple associates of Roger Stone from both the Oath Keepers and the Proud Boys have been charged with this crime. Close associates of Roger Stone, including Joshua James, have pled guilty to this crime. We know that at least 7 Oath Keepers who have been criminally charged provided personal security for Roger Stone or were seen with him on January 6th or in the weeks leading up to January 6th. For example.
So again, real quick here. They got Roger Stone. They got Steve Bannon. They got no tie here to Trump. Just they are saying things that they think Trump should be president and they think he should do this and they hear he's going to do this. Okay. It doesn't prove anything. Trump's the defendant.
Joshua James, the leader of the Alabama Oath Keepers, provided security for Roger Stone and was with him on January 5th. This is the picture of the two together on January 5th. James entered the Capitol on January 6th. He assaulted a police officer. Earlier this year, he pled guilty to seditious conspiracy and obstruction of Congress. Another example is the married couple, Kelly and Connie Meggs. Now, Kelly Meggs was the leader of the Florida chapter of the Oath Keepers. Both he and his wife provided security for Roger Stone, and both are charged with leading a military-style stack attack of Oath Keepers, attacking the Capitol on January 6th. Perhaps even more disturbing is Roger Stone's close association with Enrique Tarrio, the national chairman of the Proud Boys. Roger Stone's connection with Enrique Tarrio and the Proud Boys is well documented by video evidence with phone records the Select Committee has obtained. Tarrio, along with other Proud Boys, has been charged with multiple crimes concerning the attack on January 6th, including seditious conspiracy. During the attack, Tarrio sent a message to other Proud Boys claiming, "We did that." He also visited the White House on December 12th. Later that day, he posted a disturbing video claiming credit for the attack. This video, posted on January 6th, was apparently created prior to the attack. This big lie, President Trump's effort to convince Americans that he had won the 2020 election, began before the election results even came in. It was intentional, it was premeditated, it was not based on election results or any evidence of actual fraud affecting the results or any actual problems with voting machines. It was a plan concocted in advance to convince his supporters that he won. And the people who seemingly knew about that plan in advance would ultimately play a significant role in the events of January 6th. Mr. Chairman, I yield back.
Gentlewoman yields back.
Oh, thank
Chair
God.
recognizes
Thank God.
Gentleman from Illinois, Mr. Kinzinger, for an opening statement.
Oh,
Thank
Jesus.
you, Mr. Chairman. Very shortly after the election, the Trump campaign recognized that they had likely lost the election, and they informed Donald Trump of that fact. Even before the networks called the race for President Biden on November 7th, his chances of pulling out a victory were virtually non-existent, and President Trump knew it.
Do you know if anybody ever told the president that he had lost and that there wasn't a chance of him winning?
I know that the president, when the networks called it, of course, he was informed about the network decision. That afternoon, at some point, myself and a handful of other folks went over and sat down with the president and communicated that the odds of us prevailing in legal challenges
were very small.
You know, after the election, as of November 7th, in your judgment, what were the chances of President Trump winning the election?
After that point?
Yes.
None.
At times, President Trump acknowledged the reality of his loss. Although he publicly claimed that he had won the election, privately he admitted that Joe Biden would take over as president.
Again, this is something they've done time and time again. Again, your committee member is testifying. You're not letting your lawyers do this a lot of times, and it is a big mistake. You don't want to be. You want to put your witnesses forward. Here are my witnesses. Look at them. Look here. Right? Not make you. I mean, you can kind of enhance a little bit, but he's testifying. Okay. And the other thing is, I swear, every time I see Kinzinger, he looks like he's suffering from something. I don't know what it is, but he doesn't. Of all the people on this committee, he's the one that just seems like he's sitting on a powder keg of emotion. And I'm not sure what's going on there, but anyway, he continues.
Because of that.
So we're in the Oval and there's a discussion going on. And the president says, I think it could have been Pompeo, but he says words to the effect of, yeah, we lost, we need to let that issue go to the next guy, meaning President Biden.
I remember maybe a week after the election was called, I popped into the Oval just to give the president the headlines and see how he was doing. And he was looking at the TV and he said, "Can you believe I lost to this effing guy?"
Mark raised it with me on the A-team.
What does that show?
And so following that conversation where the motorcade ride driving back to the White House, and I had said, does the president really think that he lost? And he said, a lot of times he'll tell me that he lost, but he wants to keep fighting it. And he thinks that there might be enough to overturn the election, but he pretty much has acknowledged that he's lost.
Knowing that he had lost and that he had only weeks left.
I mean, they do a lot of this. I mean, that doesn't prove anything. I mean, anyway,
President
this is
Trump
the best they
rushed
have
to complete his unfinished business. One key example is this. President Trump issued an order for large-scale U.S. troop withdrawals. He disregarded concerns about the consequences for fragile governments on the front lines of the fight against ISIS and al-Qaeda terrorists. Knowing
this is new. They have not made this allegation before.
He acted immediately and signed this order on November 11th, which would have required the immediate withdrawal of troops from Somalia and Afghanistan, all to be complete before the Biden inauguration.
All right, this is new allegation from them. They have not made this in the prior 8 hearings. Again, nothing at all unconstitutional about this. If the Democrats lose the House, which all polling says they are going to in November, do you think maybe they're going to pass some legislation on the way out? Oh, yeah. So I don't know where they're going with this, but again, just goes to show these people have no limits. 20th. They have no compunction.
As you watch these clips, recall that General Keith Kellogg was the National Security Advisor to the Vice President and had served as Chief of Staff to the National Security Council for President Trump. And General Milley was the Chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff at the Pentagon.
Are you familiar with a memo that the President reportedly signed on November 11th, 2020, ordering that troops be withdrawn from Afghanistan and Somalia?
Yes. So I think you might have seen some things where there's a memo or something from Johnny McEntee to Douglas McGregor. It says, here's your task to get U.S. forces out of Somalia, get U.S. forces out of Afghanistan.
When you first interviewed and met Colonel Douglas McGregor, is it fair to say you discussed this decision of withdrawing from Somalia and Afghanistan, correct?
Yeah, I'm sure that was part of it, yeah.
And that was the position that he was taking over there was senior advisor to the Secretary of Defense, is that correct?
Yes.
So on that same day, just so I'm clear, he responded back to you that they, meaning DOD leadership, was not going to take any of those steps without an order.
Without a directive, yeah.
I explained in language that should be in the order while I was in the meeting with McEntee, and this was my answer to him. I said, if you want this to happen, or the president wants this to happen, he's got to write an order.
So you never wrote this down in any capacity?
Well, I sketched on a piece of paper for him some key statements. The president directs. you know, this is, what's the right word, boilerplate language?
Who within his office drafted the order?
It was myself and one of my assistants.
McEntee duly types it up, brings it in to the president. President signs it, and boom, it's over, faxed over, or emailed, scanned over to Caspertel, delivers it to me.
Was it by auto pen?
I don't know what this. So the president can do whatever. I mean, he's the commander in chief. I don't know where they're going with this.
Was it the president himself
Other than wasting
signing
our
it?
time as per usual.
It was the president.
And who obtained that signature?
I did.
It is odd. It is non-standard. It is potentially dangerous. I personally thought it was militarily not feasible, nor wise.
And I proceeded to tell the PPO and proceeded to tell McGregor that if I ever saw anything like that, I would do something physical. Because I thought what that was done was a tremendous disservice to the nation. And by the way, that...
Okay, folks. This is once again, I now see what they're doing. Okay, so they disagreed with what the president's decision was. They think he did it. They think he did it for spite, right? They've shown no evidence. All you see is two traitors who disagree with the president of the United States. Folks, the only executive branch official that is elected by the American people is the president. That's it. That's mind-blowing, but it's true. All right? I don't care what these two people think. I certainly don't care what General Miller thinks. But again, their job is to follow the rule of law. Here you have somebody here saying, if you do it again, if you make me follow the rule of the law and the president gets me an order, I'm going to do something physical. Now, that's criminal. That person needs to be impeached as saying he's still out there or criminally charged if he's not. This is insane. Literally insane.
Very contested issue. There were people who did not agree with getting out of Afghanistan. I appreciate their concerns. An immediate departure that memo said would have been catastrophic. It's the same thing that President Biden went through. It would have been a debacle.
Keep in mind, the order was for an immediate withdrawal. It would have been catastrophic. And yet, President Trump signed the
Folks,
order.
I can't emphasize enough. This is the first time they've done this. They are now taking, this is like the documents case that they have going on. This is all about breaking down the executive branch as being the commander-in-chief. They disagree with the decision, therefore he did it. Now they've done this in a public hearing. And Kinzinger, a formerly military man, I mean, he had, obviously, in order to be ashamed, you have to have shame, which he doesn't clearly. But this is despicable. And again, a complete farce.
These are the highly consequential actions of a president who knows his term will shortly end. At the same time that President Trump was acknowledging privately that he had lost the election, he was hearing that there was no evidence of fraud or irregularities sufficient to change the outcome.
I remember a call with Mr. Meadows, where Mr. Meadows was asking me what I was finding and if I was finding anything. And I remember sharing with him that we weren't finding anything that would be sufficient to change the results in any of the key states.
When was that conversation?
Probably in November, mid to late November. I think it was before my child was born.
And what was Mr. Meadows' reaction to that information?
I believe the words he used were, "So there's no there."
It would be our job to track it down and come up dry because the allegation didn't prove to be true. And we'd have to, relay the news that, that tip that someone told you about those votes or that fraud or, nothing came of it. That would be our job as the truth telling squad, and not a fun job to be it's an easier job to be telling the president about wild allegations. It's a harder job to be telling him on the back end that that wasn't true.
What was generally discussed on that topic?
This has been pretty consistent. Again, old news. I mean, that people came in. The basic backstory here is that there would be a claim of voter fraud, and then people would come back and say, well, it's either overstated or we don't have the evidence to do it. Okay. We've been through this before. It's not new.
Whether the fraud, maladministration, abuse, or irregularities, if aggregated and read most favorably to the campaign, would that be outcome determinative? And I think everyone's assessment in the room, at least amongst the staff, Mark Short, myself, and Greg Jacob, was that it was not sufficient to be outcome determinative.
Look, it's the right of any candidate to litigate genuine election disputes. Nobody argues that, but President Trump's litigation was completely unsuccessful. In our past hearings, we told you that the committee had identified a total of 62 election lawsuits filed by the Trump campaign and its allies between November 4th and January 6th of 2021. Those cases resulted in 61 losses and only a single victory, which did not affect the outcome for any candidate. The claims were not supported by any sufficient evidence of fraud or irregularities.
Again, they've been through this. We've been through this. Almost all of the 61 that they're talking about were dismissed on procedural grounds. Again, I believe if you're going to try to convince people, you've got the people that are going to vote for you anyway. You got to try to get the people in the middle that don't already have an opinion. Why not just be honest about it?
In fact, they were baseless, as judges repeatedly recognized. In none of these 60...
That's not true. When you're kicked out on technicality, procedural grounds, it's not a decision on the merits. It's saying you don't have the right to bring it. For example, if you're kicked out on standing grounds, you have no standing. I'm not saying anything about your claim other than you don't have the right to bring it.
Cases, was President Trump able to establish any viable claims of election fraud sufficient to overturn the results of the election? In those hearings, we shared with you the words used by judges around the...
Folks, that's what you do. If you want to do it properly, you say, look, he filed 62 lawsuits, and not a single one of them demonstrated sufficient fraud to change the election. That's what you do. Just say that. That's a true statement, right? But when you go further, you get out over your skis and act like things happened that didn't happen, it's problematic.
In rejecting the Trump campaign's claims. It's strong language criticizing the lack of evidentiary support for the claims of election fraud in those lawsuits. For example, a federal appeals court in Pennsylvania wrote, quote, "Charges require specific allegations and proof. We have neither here." A federal judge in Wisconsin wrote, quote, "The court has allowed the former president the chance to make his case, and he has lost on the merits." Another judge in Michigan called the claims, quote, "nothing but speculation."
And what would happen here, I've read a lot of these lawsuits, is they would kick you out on procedural grounds. Then, it's called dicta in the law. They would go off and start talking about this and this and this. Recently in Fulton County, you had one, and the judge, again, based on procedural grounds, said you can't go forward. And then later went on in the opinion to go, the rest of this is wine this court will not serve. And it's a play on wine, W-I-N-E, and wine, W-I-H-I-N-E. Again, it doesn't really prove anything. It just doesn't. I mean, here's somebody named King suing somebody named Whitner. Trump's not even on the flipping case. But anyway, they're getting some good, I'll admit, they're getting some good leeway out of this, but it doesn't really mean anything. Not to mention, the whole challenge of the electoral certification is something different, which is another thing they're trying to do here. They want you to believe that when the election is voted and the AP calls it on whenever it is the AP called it, I can't remember if it was the 11th or 12th or 13th, it was several days after the election, that's the end of that. Well, then why do you have a certification process? Riddle me that, Batman.
The conjecture that votes for President Trump were either destroyed, discarded, or switched to votes for Vice President Biden. A federal judge in Michigan sanctioned 9 attorneys, including Sidney Powell, for making frivolous allegations in an election fraud case, describing the case as a historic and profound abuse of the judicial process. Recently, a group of distinguished Republican election lawyers, former judges, and elected officials issued a report confirming the findings of the courts. In their report entitled "Lost, Not Stolen," these prominent Republicans analyzed each election challenge and concluded this: Donald Trump and his supporters failed to present evidence of fraud or inaccurate results significant enough to invalidate the results of the 2020 presidential election.
This was a group that was led by Luttig out there, and again, it's just more of the stuff. But again, they're making some points here. They're going too far with it. I think they should have stuck with that. But anyway, the fact of the matter is they just never had a court look at anything to not like a full scale audit. Again, I'm not saying his allegations or anything. I'm not saying making any opinion about that. I'm not saying anything about the election. But this stuff, they're going too far with it. I think they ought to they get the point, move on.
On December 11th, Trump's allies lost a lawsuit in the U.S. Supreme Court that he regarded as his last chance at success in the courts. A newly obtained Secret Service message from that day shows how angry President Trump was about the outcome. Quote, "Just FYI, POTUS is pissed. Breaking news, Supreme Court denied his lawsuit. He is livid now." Cassidy Hutchison, an aide to Chief of Staff Mark Meadows, was present for that conversation and described it in this way.
This is the day that the Supreme Court had rejected that case. Mr. Meadows and I were in the White House residence at a Christmas reception. And as we were walking back from the Christmas reception that evening, the president was walking out of the Oval Office, so we crossed paths in the Rose Garden colonnade. The president was fired up about the Supreme Court decision. And so I was standing next to Mr. Meadows, but I stepped back, so I was probably 2-3 feet catty corner from him, diagonal from him. The president's just raging about the decision and how it's wrong and why didn't we make more calls, and just his typical anger outburst at this decision. And the president said, he had said something to the effect of, "I don't want people to know we lost, Mark. This is embarrassing. Figure it out. We need to figure it out. I don't want people to know that we lost."
Our country is a country of laws where every person, including the president, must follow the law and respect the judgment of our courts. President Trump's closest advisors held that view both then and now.
Well, do you believe the president should abide by the rulings of the courts?
Oh, yes. We should all comply with the law at all times to the best of our ability, every one of us.
So once the courts had ruled and the Electoral College had met, the election was over in your view?
Yeah.
I mean, this is an interesting thing. So you got to understand, the courts have ruled, the Electoral College has met. That didn't happen until January 6th. There's no allegation that I've seen that Trump did anything after that. Okay, so I don't know what she's talking about here. And again, this is the trickery that they do. They just about 5 minutes ago, they were saying you don't even have the right to go challenge the certification on January 6th. That was, again, this is just sleight of hand stuff.
I said previously that when the vice president made the certification and the litigation was complete, it was complete.
When the Electoral College met on the 14th?
Yes, as of December 14th, is that right? I think that's the right date, yes.
And no, okay, now I understand. That's not true. So what happens is they meet on the 14th to do a preliminary. Again, if that's the end of that, that's the so-called safe harbor, then what's the point of having January 6th and having them open the votes and count them and have a procedure? Folks, and then that's not the way it's 3 or 4 times in American history, the House of Representatives have had to decide it. So if what they're saying is true, that the 14th December, the safe harbor clause is it, then why do we have that? This is just sleight of hand nonsense. They're working their way back to now it will be the election on whenever it is, November 3rd or the 8th, depending on how that falls on that Tuesday. And then the AP calls it, and then that's it. This is just nonsense.
Pat, that you would agree
it's
the
not the
president
Constitution.
is obligated to abide by the rulings of the courts.
Of course.
Who would say no to
and
that?
I assume you also would...
Everybody is obligated to abide by rules.
Of course. I mean, why is that exceptional?
And I assume you also would agree the president has a particular obligation to take care that the laws be faithfully executed.
Of course.
That is one of the
Trump doesn't challenge that
obligations,
either.
correct.
Ivanka, do you believe the president's obligated to abide by the rulings of the court?
Of course.
I do.
Again, wasting our time.
By mid-December of 2020,
Nobody
President
questions
Trump's senior staff were attempting to persuade him to concede the election outcome.
But if your question is that I believe he should concede the election at a point in time, yes, I did.
December 14th,
was the day that the states certified their votes and sent them to Congress. And in my view, that was the end of the matter.
Now listen, a lot of people have posited this. It's a so-called safe harbor. So what happens is you vote. Eventually the state, right, has to, quote-unquote, certify who the electoral votes are going to be. They have to do that by the so-called safe harbor date, which is December 14th, I believe, for 2020. All right? Now, there are a lot of people who take the position, okay, that's the end of that. So therefore, again, I don't know why they do, but they do. So for whatever reason, let's see, the 14th would be 17 plus 6. So 23 days later, we have a formal ceremony in the House of Representatives, and they open the ballots. And again, there's a whole procedure. If you go to our link tree below there, and by the way, if you enjoy this, hit the like button. It will help us a lot, and subscribe, tell a friend. But look, so you and I've written several pages. You go to my Substack page, several articles on this. They have a procedure. If you have one congressperson and one senator, you can object to electoral votes from states, and then there's a whole procedure for them to go break off, one for the Senate, one for the House, and to have 2 hours of debate. Why do you have that if December 14th is the end of the date? I don't know. Again, apparently Bill Barr is of the opinion it is. It's not my opinion. I'm just as much a lawyer as he is. And by the way, nor is it the opinion of a bunch of other people.
I thought that this would lead inexorably to a new administration.
I told him that my personal viewpoint was that the Electoral College had met, which is the system that our country is set under to elect a president and vice president. And I believed at that point that the means for him to pursue litigation was probably closed.
Again, probably closed. And again, now he's talking about litigation. Well, what about certification? Right? Why can't you go on? Why does the electoral? They said earlier that they have in the House they have a bill to amend the Electoral Count Act of 1887. Why do they have to amend it? Right? They have to amend it because they don't like the process that currently exists, where you can't object to certification. This is just an attack on the rule of law with Trump as the face. Yeah, there you go.
Secretary of Labor Gene Scalia, the son of late Justice Scalia, visited President Trump in mid-December and explained the situation clearly.
And so I had to put a call into the president. I might have called on the 13th. We spoke, I believe, on the 14th, in which I conveyed to him that I thought that it was time for him to acknowledge that President Biden had prevailed in the election. But I communicated to the president that when that legal process is exhausted and when the electors have voted, that's the point at which that outcome needs to be expected. I told him that I did believe, yes, that once those legal processes were run, if fraud had not been established, that had affected the outcome of the election, that unfortunately I believed that what had to be done was concede the outcome.
Not only did the courts reject President Trump's fraud and other allegations, his Department of Justice appointees, including Bill Barr, Jeffrey Rosen, and Richard Donahue, did as well. President Trump knew the truth. He heard what all his experts and senior staff were telling him. He knew he had lost the election, but he made the deliberate choice to ignore the courts, to ignore the Justice Department, to ignore his campaign leadership, to ignore senior advisors, and to pursue a completely unlawful effort to overturn the election. His intent was plain: ignore the rule of law and stay in power. Mr. Chairman, I yield back.
Gentleman yields back. The chair recognizes the gentlewoman from Virginia, Ms. Luria.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mid-December was a turning point. President Trump made a decision, a choice.
So it looks like
to ignore the courts and his
It looks
advice.
like what we're going to have is just every committee member getting whatever time that they get to have. And if that's the case, I had planned to do 2 hours. I don't know that if they're going to go much past 2 hours, I may just drop off because it's just kind of silly. But anyway, by the way, she's likely to lose. She's one of the few that's in a close race, and she's likely to lose because of this. So, anyway.
And to push forward to overturn the election. His efforts to overturn the election were not random or disconnected. Rather, they were part of a coordinated, multi-part plan to ensure that he stayed in power. Donald Trump was the driver behind each part of this plan. He was personally and directly involved. Of course, a key element of the plan was continuing to convince tens of millions of Americans that he did not, in fact, lose. Again, he did this even though his own campaign advisors and his Justice Department officials told him his claims of fraud were wrong. In this video, you'll see that even when top law enforcement officials told the president his election fraud claims were false, he still repeated the claims in the days and weeks that followed. Sometimes, even the very next day.
I specifically raised the Dominion voting machines, which I found to be among the most disturbing allegations. Disturbing in the sense that I saw absolutely zero basis for the allegations. I told them that it was crazy stuff, and they were wasting their time on that. And it was doing a grave disservice to the country.
We have a company that's very suspect. Its name is Dominion. With the turn of a dial or the change of a chip, you can press a button for Trump and the vote goes to Biden. What kind of a system is this?
We definitely talked about Antrim County again. That was sort of done at that point because the hand recount had been done and all of that. But we cited back to that to say, you know, this is an example of what people are telling you and what's being filed in some of these court filings that are just not supported by the evidence. And this is the problem. The problem is people keep telling you these things and they turn out not to be true.
In addition, there is the highly troubling matter of Dominion voting systems. In one Michigan county alone, 6,000 votes were switched from Trump to Biden, and the same systems are used in the majority of states in our country.
I went into this and would, tell them how crazy some of these allegations were and how ridiculous some of them were. I'm talking about some of them like, more absentee votes were cast in Pennsylvania than there were absentee ballots requests. Stuff like that. It was just easy to blow up. There was never an indication of interest in what the actual facts were.
There were more votes than there were voters. Think of that. You had more votes than you had voters. That's an easy one to figure. And
now, folks, they're making some hay with this. And again, I disagreed with the Trump administration's decision to go with some of the more, bombastic claims that were difficult or impossible to prove. But he chose to go with them, the Dominion being one of them. And, I think the better thing to do might have been to focus on changes that were made or governors making changes, even though the legislature is supposed to make election rules. But anyway, they're scoring some points with this, to be sure.
The thousands.
Then he raised the big vote dump, as he called it, in Detroit. And that, he said people saw boxes coming into the counting station at all hours of the morning. And I said, Mr. President, there are 630 precincts in Detroit, and unlike elsewhere in the state, they centralized the counting process, so they're not counted in each precinct. They're moved to counting stations, and so the normal process would involve boxes coming in at all different hours.
This is Michigan. At 6:31 in the morning, a vote dump of 149,772 votes came in unexpectedly.
With regard to Georgia, we looked at the tape, we interviewed the witnesses. There is no suitcase. The president kept fixating on this suitcase that supposedly had fraudulent ballots and that the suitcase was rolled out from under the table. And I said, no, sir, there is no suitcase. You can watch that video over and over. There is no suitcase. There is a wheeled bin where they carry the ballots, and that's just how they move ballots around that facility. There's nothing suspicious about that at all.
Election officials pull boxes, Democrats, and suitcases of ballots out from under a table. You all saw it on television. Totally fraudulent.
This happened over and over again. And our committee's report will document it. Purposeful lies made in public direct.
So again, folks, they claim their lies. I don't know how they know that unless they can read minds. But this is all old news. They said they were going to give us new evidence, and we all know all this.
At odds with what Donald Trump knew from unassailable sources, the Justice Department's own investigations, and his own campaign. Donald Trump maliciously repeated this nonsense to a wide audience over and over again. His intent was to deceive. President Trump's plan also involved trying to coerce government officials to change the election outcome in the states he lost. He personally reached out to numerous state officials and pressured them to take unlawful steps to alter the election results in those states. These actions, taken directly by the president himself, made it clear what his intentions were: to prevent the orderly transfer of power. We all recall, for example, President Trump's tape-recorded call with Georgia Secretary of State Brad Raffensperger. At the time this call occurred...
I can't believe they're going to go to this. Again, this is just yet another example of incompetence. This call, there's nothing wrong with this call. He believes what he's been... If he believes, and I don't know if he does or nobody knows. Only God and Trump know. But if he believes, that there are votes out there and that the things he's being told, he's saying fine. He's not saying fine in terms of fabricate. And they don't know and they can't prove it. But again, they just can't help themselves. Every single solid... It's ironic here because just as they're accusing Trump of believing everything he's been told, they believe everything they've been told.
President Trump had already been told repeatedly by the U.S. Justice Department, by his campaign, and by his advisors that his allegations of fraud in Georgia were false.
So, look, all I want to do is this. I just want to find 11,780 votes, which is one more than we have, because we won the state. Look, we need...
How does fine votes? I mean, why do they think fine means manufacture or fabricate? He's saying go do an investigation. Anyway, I don't know why
Only
they do this.
11,000 votes. We have far more than that as it stands now. We'll have more and more. So what are we going to do here, folks? I only need 11,000 votes. Fellas, I need 11,000 votes. Give me a break.
I just want to find 11,780 votes. That's an extraordinary demand by the president, especially since he already knew from the Justice Department there was no genuine basis for this request. No one could think it would be legal for the Secretary of State to simply find the votes the president needed in order to win. Secretary Raffensperger told the president the truth, that he lost the election in Georgia. But President Trump did not accept that answer. Instead, he suggested that Secretary Raffensperger himself might be prosecuted.
That's a criminal offense. And you can't let that happen. That's a big risk to you and to Ryan, your lawyer. That's a big risk.
We know that President Trump's White House advisors reacted negatively. Immediately after the call, Cassidy Hutchinson had a conversation with Chief of Staff Mark Meadows.
I remember looking at Mark and I said, Mark, you can't possibly think we're going to pull this off. Like, that call was crazy. And he looked at me and just started shaking his head and he was like, no, Cass, he knows it's over. He knows he lost, but we're going to keep trying. There's some good options out there still. We're going to keep trying.
This call and other related activity is now the focus of an ongoing...
And again, this is a problem for them because, okay, folks, if it was a complete fabricated thing from the beginning, which is what they're claiming, right? It was a big thing to try to overturn an election. Not challenge an election, but overturn an election. Okay, why in the world would he be flipping, messing around with Georgia this late? It's already lost. It's already gone. What difference does it make, right? This is consistent with somebody who really thinks that he's about to find some fraud. I'm not saying it happened, but that's what I would assume from a witness who's doing this. Again, and there's no reason for them to bring this in. They got everything they need here. They could do it legitimately.
Criminal investigation in Fulton County, Georgia. And Georgia's not the only state where President Trump tried to pressure state officials to change the results. He also attempted to pressure state officials in Arizona, Pennsylvania, and Michigan to change the results in those states as well.
Again, that shows to me a person who really believes in what they're doing. If it's falling apart, you get in the getaway car and the bank's not going to get robbed and you leave. I don't understand what this is.
While President Trump was pressuring state officials, he was also trying to use the Department of Justice to change the election result. His top officials told him that there was no evidence to support his claims of fraud, but he didn't care. As he told them, just say the election was corrupt and leave the rest to me and the Republican congressmen. When these officials would not do what he said, President Trump embarked in an effort to install Jeff Clark as acting attorney general, solely because he would do what others in the department would not do. We know that Trump was doing so for a specific purpose, so Clark could corruptly employ the Justice Department's authority to help persuade the states to flip electoral votes. For example, when Richard Donahue and Jeff Rosen, both appointed by President Trump, learned of Mr. Clark's proposal, here's why they said they forcefully rejected it.
And I recall toward the end saying, what you're proposing is nothing less than the United States Justice Department meddling in the outcome of a presidential election.
But more importantly, this was not based on fact. This was actually contrary to the facts as developed by department investigations over the last several weeks and months. So I responded to that, and for the department to insert itself into the political process this way, I think would have had grave consequences for the country. It may very well have spiraled us into a constitutional crisis.
We know from our investigation that President Trump offered Jeff Clark the position of acting attorney general, and that Jeff Clark had decided to accept it. The only reason this ultimately did not happen is that the White House counsel and a number of Justice Department officials confronted the president in the Oval Office and threatened mass resignations.
And then, and I said something to the effect of, you're going to have a huge personnel blowout within hours because you're going to have all kinds of problems with resignations and other issues. And that's not going to be in anyone's interest.
The president ultimately relented only because the entire leadership of the Department of Justice, as well as his White House counsel, threatened to resign.
Again, I'm not sure what this proves or what has this to do with their claims here, but I mean, obviously it doesn't look good. But they do a lot of this. They do a lot of smearing. I don't know where it goes with it.
Mr. Chairman, I yield back.
Thankfully.
The young woman yields back. The chair recognizes the young woman from Florida, Mrs. Murphy, for an opening statement.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. President Trump's efforts to unlawfully overturn the results of the 2020 election were not limited to the big lie and pressuring state officials and the Department of Justice officials. Another key part...
This is an unusual hearing in that I've never seen this many opening statements. So, I can only assume they're just going to go around the round table and they're just rehashing what they've done before. This is kind of a wrap-up and they're going to have a vote at the end. Again, I may not stick around for this. I'd planned to go till 3 o'clock, and I'm still probably going to go to 3 o'clock, but I can't take much more of this. And she, by the way, already lost her re-election bid, so she's not even going to be in Congress anymore. This is just kind of sort of pathetic, really.
President's effort was a scheme to assemble fake electors to cast false electoral votes in the states that President Trump lost. This was something done not only with the president's knowledge, but also with his direct participation. Ronna McDaniel, chair of the Republican National Committee, testified before this committee that President Trump and his attorney, Dr. John Eastman, called her and asked her to arrange for the fake electors to meet and rehearse the process of casting their fake votes.
When I received the call, again, I don't remember the exact date. It was from the White House switchboard, and it was President Trump who had contacted me.
And did President Trump have anyone else on the line with him?
He introduced me to a gentleman named John Eastman. So I vaguely remember him mentioning that he was a professor, and then essentially he turned the call over to Mr. Eastman, who then proceeded to talk about the importance of the RNC helping the campaign gather these contingent electors in case any of the legal challenges that were ongoing changed the result of any of the states?
These fake electors were ultimately part of the president's plan to replace genuine Biden electors with Trump electors on January 6th. As part of this plan, the false electoral slates were sent to the National Archives and to the Capitol. The fake electors plan was also tied to another plan, the coercive pressure campaign to make Vice President Mike Pence reject or refuse to count certain Biden electoral votes so that President Donald Trump would, quote, win re-election instead. Here's what Vice President Pence has said about this scheme.
President Trump said I had the right to overturn the election. But President Trump is wrong. I had no right to
That's not what he said. But anyway, again, the question here is under the Electoral Count Act of 1887, how much power does the vice president have as a presiding officer? Okay, and there's some question about whether or not, you know, electoral votes can be rejected from enough states that would throw it to the House of Representatives, and it's a bunch of other stuff. Again, if you go to our greatamericanmail.substack.com, greatamericanmail.substack.com, if you look below, you'll see a link tree. You can find it there, and if you do that, you will see there's a whole procedure for this. Now, Pence, at this point in this Federal Society meeting, was taking on Trump because they're political rivals now. Never two shall the two ever meet again. So he's basically claiming the president wanted to do something that he didn't, right? He wanted him to do some procedural things that would have potentially thrown it to the House of Representatives. That's what he wanted to do. He didn't want him to, quote unquote, do whatever it is Pence is claiming he wanted to do. So I don't know why he's doing that.
the election. The presidency belongs to the American people and the American people alone. And frankly, there is no idea more un-American than the notion that any one person could choose the American president.
Make no mistake, President Trump knew that what he was demanding Vice President Pence do was illegal. He was informed of this repeatedly, and specifically on January 4th. Even his lawyer, John Eastman, admitted in front of President Trump that this plan would break the law by violating the Electoral Count Act.
Did John Eastman ever admit, as far as you know, in front of the president, that his proposal would violate the Electoral Count Act?
I believe he did on the 4th.
And Dr. Eastman confirmed this in writing.
I believe he did. That's not saying he did.
Recall this email written on January 6, in which Vice President Pence's counsel asked Dr. Eastman, "Did you advise the president that in your professional judgment, the vice president does not have power to decide things unilaterally?" Dr. Eastman replied, "He's been so advised." Of course, President...
That's not what the claim was. And again, this is a little bit of sleight of hand as to what they're talking about. No one has ever said that the vice president can unilaterally decide. That's not true. And again, if you go to our Substack page, you can read about this. We've got several articles up there about it. But what has to happen is first you have to have a senator, you have to have a congressperson, and then you have to present objections. Then there's a question about what the president can do with objections. Unilaterally, he wouldn't need that. So again, out over their skis, doing something they don't need to do.
His own White House counsel, Pat Cipollone, also recognized that this plan was unlawful. Here is Mr. Cipollone's testimony.
My view is that the vice president didn't have the legal authority to do anything except what he did.
There is no doubt that President Trump's pressure campaign on Vice President Pence was significant. On the morning of January 6, President Trump called the vice president from the Oval Office and demanded that he overturn the results of the election.
Again, that's not what
Numerous
happened.
witnesses told the Select Committee about the invective that President Trump leveled at his own vice president.
Something to the effect, the wording's wrong. I made the wrong decision 4 or 5 years ago.
And the word that she relayed to that the president called the vice president, I apologize for being impolite, but do you remember what she said her father called him?
The P word.
But Vice President Pence didn't waver even when his own life was endangered by President Trump and the rioters at the Capitol on January 6th, as you'll see in more detail later. A federal judge concluded, based on this and other evidence, that President Trump's pressure campaign against the vice president likely violated multiple criminal statutes. In the end, all these people, Department of Justice officials, state elections officials, his own vice president, stood strong in the face of President Trump's immense pressure. But as we now know, President Trump had already summoned tens of thousands of his supporters to Washington on January 6th to take back their country. On December 19th, President Trump first told his supporters to come to Washington. In this and numerous other tweets, he fraudulently and repeatedly promoted January 6th as the day Americans could come and change the election outcome. For weeks, President Trump worked with others to plan the rally, intending all along that he would send an assembled crowd of angry supporters to the Capitol after his speech on the Ellipse on January 6th. We obtained a text message that one rally organizer sent on January 4th. In part, it reads that, quote, POTUS is going to have us march there / the Capitol, and POTUS is going to just call for it unexpectedly. Again, each of these examples, the big lie, the pressure campaigns against state officials, the pressure campaign against the Department of Justice and his vice president, the fake electors, summoning the mob, all of this demonstrates President Trump's personal and substantial role in the plot to overturn the election. He was intimately involved. He was the central player. Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and I yield back.
Gentlewoman yields back.
Not very effective at all. And again, just a rehash of stuff. I guess we're probably going to get Adam Shifty Schiff now.
The chair recognizes the gentleman from California, Mr. Schiff,
Oh, there
for
you
an
go.
opening statement.
Shocking.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. In our past hearings, you have seen direct evidence that President Trump sent a crowd of his supporters to the Capitol on January 6th, knowing they were armed and angry. This was the last
Once again, lying about them being armed. Not true. Not a single firearm or knife or anything like it has been found.
desperate and dangerous prong of his plan to disrupt the joint session and prevent the orderly transition of power. On the morning of the 6th, the Secret Service was at the Ellipse, screening the members of the crowd as they entered the rally site. And they noticed something significant about the crowd. Tens of thousands of people were outside the rally site, but did not want to go through the magnetometers, the metal detectors that were used to screen for dangerous weapons. Since our last hearings, the Select Committee has received greater cooperation from the Secret Service. Nevertheless, Secret Service text messages from this period were erased in the days and months following the attack on the Capitol, even though documents and materials related to January 6th had already been requested by the Department of Justice.
Now, how is this Trump's fault? I don't know. I mean, again.
And Congress. But we were able to obtain nearly 1 million emails, recordings, and other electronic records from the Secret Service. Over the month of August, the Select Committee began its review of hundreds of thousands of pages.
And I want you to understand again, they have all this evidence, and all we get is what they deign to show us plebes at this hearing. They got it all. They show us when they feel like it. Again, we already know, we've heard about this. This was when he wanted to take down the magnetometers so he could go, so his supporters could come. He said, they're not here to get me. There's nothing new about this.
And multiple hours of that material, providing substantial new evidence about what happened on January 6th and the days leading up to it. That review continues.
Listen, I haven't seen this. We're live with this, okay? I guarantee you he doesn't produce anything new. Guarantee it. He just said there's new evidence. It hadn't revealed jack squat.
What you're about to hear is just a sample of the new and relevant evidence
All right, let's hear it.
that we have received. Mounting evidence before January 6th predicted violence, and not just violence generally, but violence directed at the Capitol. Intelligence about this risk was directly available to the U.S. Secret Service and others in the White House in advance of the Ellipse speech, in advance of the march to the Capitol. The committee has shown evidence that President Trump was aware of the risk of violence. The FBI, U.S. Capitol Police, Metropolitan Police, and other agencies all gathered and disseminated intelligence suggesting the possibility of violence
at the Capitol prior to the riot. We're now going to show you just a sample of the evidence we have received. Days before January 6th, the President's senior advisors at the Department of Justice and FBI, for example, received an intelligence summary that included material indicating that certain people traveling to Washington were making plans to attack the Capitol. This summary noted online calls to occupy federal buildings, rhetoric about invading the Capitol building, and plans to arm themselves and to engage in political violence at the event. Other agencies were also hearing predictions suggesting possible violence at the Capitol. On a call with President Trump's White House National Security...
Again, there's a dispute going on about whether or not Trump requested people be there, whether Nancy Pelosi overruled it. If Trump is getting these reports, so is Nancy. Again, I don't know what this proves, and it's old news
January
anyway.
2021, Deputy Secretary of Defense David Norquist had warned about the potential that the Capitol would be the target of the attack. Here's General Mark Milley, who was also present for this call,
a huge Trump hater,
describing Deputy Secretary Norquist's warning.
So during these calls, I only remember in hindsight because he was almost like clairvoyant. Norquist says during one of these calls, the greatest threat is a direct assault on the Capitol. I'll never forget it.
This email, for example, was an alert that the Secret Service received on December 24th with the heading, "Armed and Ready, Mr. President." According to the intelligence, multiple users online were targeting members of Congress, instructing others to march into the chambers on January 6th and make sure they know who to fear. In this report, received on December 26th, the Secret Service field office relayed a tip that had been received by the FBI. According to the source of the tip, the Proud Boys plan to march armed into D.C. They think that they will have a large enough group to march into D.C. armed, the source reported, and will outnumber the police so they can't be stopped. The source went on to say, their plan is to literally kill people. Please take this tip seriously and investigate further. The source also made clear that the Proud Boys had detailed their plans on multiple websites, like the Donald.win. Let's pause here. The Secret Service had advance information more than 10 days beforehand regarding the Proud Boys planning for January 6th. We know
what did the Proud Boys do on January 6th? Have they said what that was?
Now, of course, that the Proud Boys and others did lead the assault on our Capitol building.
They haven't shown that.
On December 31st, agents circulated intelligence reports that President Trump's supporters have proposed a movement to occupy Capitol Hill. In particular, they flagged spikes in violent hashtags like, "We are the..."
Again, they've been doing this. This is the 9th hearing. They've been doing this all the time. Show me where the plan is, how you're going to take the person, how you're going to get him to be the president. You can't do it. There's just no way to do it. I don't know why they keep talking about these people, because even if they had, you get people with zip ties and Viking helmets, it doesn't make you the president of the United States.
1776 rebel and occupy capitals. On January 5th, a Secret Service open source unit flagged a social media account on the Donald.win that threatened to bring a sniper rifle to a rally on January 6th. The user also posted a picture of a handgun and rifle with the caption, "Sunday Gun Day, providing Overwatch January 6th will be wild." Later, on the evening of January 5th, the Secret Service learned during an FBI briefing that right-wing groups were establishing armed QRFs, or Quick Reaction Forces, readying to deploy for January 6th. Groups like the Oath Keepers were standing by at the ready should POTUS request assistance. By invoking the Insurrection Act, agents were informed. As we all know now, the Oath Keepers did play a specific role on January 6th and had stashed weapons in Virginia for further violence that evening. Also on that day, the Secret Service was readying its security precautions for the president's speech at the Ellipse the next day. A Secret Service deputy chief instructed agents to add certain objects to the list of items that would be prohibited at the rally site, including ballistic vests, tactical vests, armored or not, and ballistic helmets. By the morning of January 6th, it was clear that the Secret Service anticipated violence. It felt like the calm before the storm, one agent predicted in a Protective Intelligence Division chat group.
Again, this is a dispute that's been raging for months. A lot of people think that, more should have been done to keep this quelled down. But anyway, no weapons. Again, no weapons were found other than zip ties and Viking helmets.
Another remarked how agents were watching the crazies on live stream. By 9:09 that morning, the Secret Service could also see that many rally goers were assembled outside the security perimeter. One agent emailed, possibly because they have stuff that couldn't come through, would probably be an issue with this crowd. Just a thought. By 9:30,
we've talked about this before. I mean, they didn't want to have to go through it, so this is just
agents
boring.
reported more than 25,000 people outside the rally site. An hour later, the Secret Service reported that the crowd was on the mall watching, but not in line. The head of the President's Secret Service Protective Detail, Robert Engel, was specifically aware of the large crowds outside the magnetometers. He passed that information along to Tony Ornato, who worked for Mark Meadows in the Chief of Staff's office. The documents we obtained from the Secret Service make clear that the crowd outside the magnetometers was armed, and the agents knew it. Take a look at...
Okay, again, who cares? They didn't make it to the Capitol. This is just silly. But again, this is what amateurs do. They think they're going to make a point, and they just so want the point to be there that they go with it. And again, if there were any minority representation, and there's none on this committee, they would be throwing this back in their face.
We're seeing and hearing,
which explains why there's no minority representation.
One report from the rally site at 7:58 a.m. said, some members of the crowd are wearing ballistic helmets, body armor, carrying radio equipment, and military-grade backpacks. Another, from 9:30 a.m., said that there were possibly OC spray, meaning pepper spray, and or plastic riot shields. At 11:23 a.m., agents also reported possible armed individuals, one with a Glock, one with a rifle.
Okay.
Over the next hour, agents reported possible man with a gun reported, confirmed pistol on hip located in a tree, and one detained at 14th and I.
Why aren't any of these, if they're breaking the law, which they're probably not, that's why we're having to listen. This is just typical of what they do. They find stuff, and then it's a smear job. Okay, show me where there's a crime. Show me where these people were arrested. Again, no weapons were found that day.
Northwest individual had an assault rifle on his person.
Sort of pathetic, really.
Minutes before President Trump began his speech, members of the Federal Protective Service, an agency tasked with protecting federal buildings, were alerted about an arrest of a protester with a gun on his waistband. And during the speech, the weapons-related arrests continued. At 12:13 p.m., United States Park Police arrested a man with a rifle in front of the World War II memorial. These agents remarked on the number of weapons that had been seized that day, speculating that the situation could get worse. With so many weapons found so far, you wonder how many are unknown, one agent wrote at 12:36 p.m.
And yet, when the dust fell, not a nary a weapon was found. Again, this, to me, harms the committee, but they're too dumb to know it.
Could be sporty after dark. At 12:47 p.m., another agent responded, no doubt. The people at the Ellipse said they are moving to the Capitol after the POTUS speech. As the documents we received make clear, the Secret Service was aware of weapons possessed by those gathered at rallies in D.C. as early as the evening before. Take this document, for instance, which details multiple arrests in the crowds demonstrating on January 5th. Those arrests were for weapons offenses, handguns, high-capacity feeding devices, ammunition. What the Secret Service saw on the 6th was entirely consistent with the violent rhetoric circulating in the days before the joint session on pro-Trump websites, at times amplified by the president's own advisors.
What's sad about Schiff is that he's a trained lawyer. He should know better than this. But again, he doesn't have to worry about the media. He doesn't have to worry about any minority representation, so he can just say whatever he wants. But it's not effective.
On one of these sites, as you've heard, one of those was called the Donald.win. The Select Committee has obtained a text message that Jason Miller, a senior communications advisor, sent to Mark Meadows less than a week before January 6th. I got the base fired up, he wrote in all caps. He sent a link to this page on the Donald.win. The linked webpage had comments about the joint session of Congress on January 6th. Take a look at some of those comments. Gallows don't require electricity. If the filthy commie maggots try to push their fraud through, there will be hell to pay. Our lawmakers in Congress can leave one of two ways.
This is another one of their tricks. It's all smear jobs. Okay, so there's a bunch of stuff, a bunch of people saying nefarious things they shouldn't be saying. Who cares? It doesn't. Again, a lot of what they have is just innuendo, smear, hearsay. And again, I want you to understand, this committee has been going on now, right, for over a year. This is the best. You're seeing the best they got. And all that money they've wasted with no minority representation. It's pathetic.
After rightfully certifying Trump the winner. Mr. Miller claimed that he had no idea about the hundreds of comments like these in the link that he sent to Mark Meadows.
If I had seen something like that, I probably would have flipped it to someone at the White House. Or if I had seen something of that nature, I would have said, we got to flag this for Secret Service or something.
Now let's see what happens when Schiff comes back. What I hear is, if I had sent it out, he has no proof he clicked the link. None.
That nature.
How many links do you get you don't click?
But the Trump administration was aware of this.
See, he just moves on. He just smeared Miller by innuendo and then just moves on. Because he can.
Rhetoric prior to January 6th. In fact, as we have seen, the Secret Service and other agencies knew of the prospect of violence well in advance of the president's speech at the Ellipse. Despite this, certain White House and Secret Service witnesses previously testified that they had received no intelligence about violence that could have potentially threatened any of the protectees on January 6th, including the vice president. Evidence strongly suggests that this testimony is not credible, and the committee is reviewing additional material from the Secret Service and other sources.
Okay, fascinating. Oh, we have evidence that might prove this to be false, but we're still looking at it. I mean, you can't get away with that in a court of law, and you shouldn't be able to. That's just, again, even for Schiff,
the Secret Service
that's pathetic.
Was monitoring this kind of online activity and was sharing and receiving the results of that effort. They work closely with other agencies, sharing intelligence about the joint session of Congress derived from social media and other sources. The same day Jason Miller sent his text message, agents received reports about a spike in activity on another platform called Parler. This was December 30th. In this email, an agent received a report noting a lot of violent rhetoric on Parler directed at government people and entities, including Secret Service protectees. One of these protectees was Vice President Pence, perhaps the primary target of President Trump's pressure campaign in the days leading up to January 6th. The day before the joint session, on January 5th, Secret Service was aware of increased chatter focused on Vice President Pence, in particular, whether he would do what President Trump wanted him to do, reverse the results of the election in the joint session the next day, January 6th. On the morning of the 6th, agents received alerts of online threats that Vice President Pence would be, quote, a dead man walking if he doesn't do the right thing. Another agent reported, quote, I saw several other alerts saying they will storm the Capitol if he doesn't do the right thing. The anger reflected in these postings was obvious. The man at the center of the storm on January 6th, President Trump.
Yeah, this is just obvious. So they're just going to go through the evidence or the lack of evidence that they don't have through the rest of the people here. It's just clear what they're doing now. This is pathetic. I mean, what's sad about this is, and again, this is the 9th one, I've done all of them, is they never really had stuff and they just kept getting worse. And so now, instead of going and saying, hey, we had, let's just say hypothetically, we had, 8 hearings and let's pick the best 3 that we have and go with them and maybe sprinkle in the 4th or the 5th best, right? No. They're just basically regurgitating through different speakers all the stuff they did, the good, the bad, and the ugly. And you know why? Because they never hear about the ugly. They never hear about the bad, because all they have is an echo chamber that says it's all good, it's all powerful. Most of it isn't. I mean, I've acknowledged, if you've been watching this live stream, I've acknowledged several times they've been scoring some points, but this isn't scoring any points. The weapons were there, so what? People made violent threats, so what? They didn't do anything. It just doesn't make any sense.
On the evening of January 5th, President Trump gathered a few of his communications staffers in the Oval Office. The door was open, allowing the president and others assembled there to hear the sounds of the crowd gathered at Freedom Plaza just a few blocks from the White House.
What's this
President
supposed to
Trump
prove?
could tell
So
that
what?
his supporters were riled up. Here again is Judd Deere, a deputy White House press secretary.
Folks, I want you to
describing-
imagine before Dr. King's speech or the civil rights speeches of the 1960s on the monument, right, on the mall. I want you to imagine if you sit here and they play, yeah, they were fired up. Those civil rights people, they were fired up on the mall the day before. I mean, can you imagine that? So what? No, I mean, that's what rallies are. And we could go through all the stuff that happened during COVID with Antifa and people saying that who said protests should be polite and all this stuff. And this is just embarrassing. I mean, and Schiff, again, should know better.
He fairly quickly moved to how fired up the crowd is.
Trump likes crowds. This is news.
What did he say about it?
Just that they were fired up. They were angry. They feel like the election has been stolen, that the election was rigged, that he went on and on about that for a little bit.
Yes, the president knew the crowd was angry because he had stoked that anger. He knew that they believed that the election had been rigged and stolen because he had told them falsely that it had been rigged and stolen. And by the time he incited that angry mob to march on the Capitol, he knew they were armed and dangerous. All the better to stop the peaceful transfer.
Folks, if this were a jury trial and that was my opponent, I'd wipe the floor with him. I can't believe he did it again. No weapons made it to the Capitol. So you can't do that. You can't say they had weapons, but then none of that. To me demonstrates that they weren't trying to do something violent.
Mr. Chairman, I yield back.
Oh, thank God. Thank God.
Gentleman yields back. At this point in our meeting, we'll take a brief recess. Pursuant to the order of the committee of today, the chair declares the committee in recess.
All right, folks, I'm going to do one thing, and then I'm just going to wrap it up. I had budgeted, I'm sorry, I pushed something I had at 2:30 in my real job back to 3 o'clock, so I unfortunately I can't go even if I wanted to. I really don't want to because there's nothing here. Let me shift over and show you one thing, though. Here's this is a long document I've been keeping. I've live streamed all 8 prior of these, and so, folks, here's what's going on, what they've been trying to prove. And again, this is a wrap-up hearing. There's nothing new to see here. What they're going to do is they're going to bring on Aguilar, and I forget the others, but there's 3 or 4 more people, and they're going to take another segment that they tried to prove, and they're going to run up the flagpole, and it's not going to do anybody any good. It's a bunch of nonsense. But anyway, here are the things that they have tried to prove as a committee. Nothing new here to see today, so I'm going to cut the live stream short. But anyway, 1, Trump caused the violence. I think, quote unquote, this is the closest they've come to do anything. Now, they can't do anything with it because you have to show that incitement of imminent danger, which you can't show, okay? Challenging Biden's certification is a coup or insurrection. They can't show that either. Everybody knew he was going to do it. Trump incited the violence. That's Brandenburg versus Ohio. It has to be specific and has to be imminent. It was neither. Trump was derelict of his duty on January 6th. No way he did that, not even close. Trump's not eligible for future office under Section 3 of the 14th Amendment, which provides that if you engage in insurrection or provide comfort to somebody who did, you're not eligible. Can't prove that either. Trump has a connection with the Oath Keepers and Proud Boys. You saw a lot of that today. I don't know where they're going with that. Don't even understand it. And then they threw this one in like the fourth hearing. Trump grifted Americans by raising campaign cash for legal defense fund, which didn't exist, and he never spent on the lawsuits. I don't know where they're going with that either. So anyway, folks, I've live streamed all the rest of them in their completeness, but this one, is a lot longer. Again, I budgeted 2 hours, and it looks like they're going to go more like 3.5. And then number 2, there's nothing new here. This is just a rehash right before the election, by the way, which you would think they would not have the gall to do that. But again, these people do not appear to be moored into reality. So again, if you enjoyed this, please subscribe. Please tell a friend about it. And if they do any more hearings or do anything interesting, we will, of course, bring that to you. So if you like this live stream, again, like it. It will help us a lot. Subscribe, tell a friend about it, and we hope to see you on the next one.